The scent of cinnamon and pine needles hangs heavy in the air, a familiar perfume that instantly transports me back to childhood winters. Outside, snowflakes dance like tiny ballerinas against the windowpane, each one carrying with it the promise of Christmas magic. Inside, our home is transformed into a wonderland twinkling with lights, adorned with ornaments collected over generations, and filled with the warmth of family laughter and anticipation. It's a season steeped in tradition, where every decoration, every song, every recipe carries meaning and memory. Yet, among all these cherished Christmas customs, there's one that has always stood out not for its beauty or festivity, but for its sheer peculiarity, the mysterious disappearance of the broom. As a child, I remember watching the days count down to Christmas with a mixture of excitement and impatience. The house would be abuzz with activity, baking cookies that would disappear before they even cooled, wrapping presents that would remain hidden under the tree until the appointed hour, and the endless stringing of lights that somehow never looked quite right despite hours of careful arrangement. Through all this festive chaos, one thing remained constant: the broom vanished. It wasn't an event that was announced or explained, it simply happened. One day, the broom would be leaning against the kitchen wall, ready for its daily duties of sweeping up crumbs and stray fallen needles. The next, it would be gone. Not just put away in some logical place like the broom closet or the garage, but completely absent from its usual haunts. I remember searching for it as a game, peeking under beds, checking behind curtains, even looking in the refrigerator once when I was particularly imaginative. But the broom was nowhere to be found. "Where's the broom?" I'd ask, my small voice echoing in the suddenly too quiet house. My mother would just smile mysteriously and say something vague like, "Oh, it's taking a little Christmas vacation." Or my father would wink and suggest that Santa needed it for his sleigh. No one ever gave me a straight answer, not even when I pleaded with my grandmother, who usually knew all the family secrets and traditions. "Don't worry about the broom, my dear," she'd say, patting my head. "It's where it needs to be." And that would be the end of the conversation. This annual disappearance became one of the great mysteries of my childhood, right up there with whatever was in the presents wrapped in that distinctive paper with reindeers, or why Uncle Bob always fell asleep during the Christmas Eve service. But unlike those other mysteries, the broom's vanishing act was something I noticed every single year without fail. It was as reliable as the appearance of the Christmas tree or the inevitable argument about whether to put an angel or a star on top. What made this tradition particularly puzzling was that it happened without fail, yet no one ever spoke of it except in hushed, mysterious tones. It wasn't like hiding the pickle ornament on the tree, which was a game everyone participated in and laughed about. The broom disappearance was different, quieter, more deliberate, and somehow more important. As I grew older, I stopped asking about it, accepting it as one of those unexplained family quirks that you just learn to live with. Every Christmas season, I'd notice the broom missing, shrug, and move on. But the question always lingered in the back of my mind: why? Why did my family hide the broom every Christmas? What was the significance of this seemingly random act? Now, as an adult with children of my own, I find myself carrying on these same traditions, passing down the recipes, the songs, and the stories that make our Christmas celebrations uniquely ours. Yet the broom mystery remains unsolved until recently, that is. When my own daughter asked me the same question I'd asked my mother and grandmother decades ago, I realized it was time to finally uncover the truth behind this peculiar family tradition. Dear viewer, check if you're still subscribed to the channel. Sometimes subscriptions can be automatically cancelled, so it's always good to double-check. Also, consider becoming a channel member. As a member, you'll enjoy amazing benefits like watching our content ad-free. Plus, you can support our work by becoming a channel backer with a thanks contribution. Your help allows us to invest in better tools and raise the quality of our productions even further. Join us on this journey and become part of our community. Oh, and don't forget to comment with the city you're listening from and what time it is there. We'd love to know. What I discovered when I finally sat down with my grandmother, a woman who has seen 80 Christmases come and go, was far more than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a quirky family habit or an old wives' tale. It was a story, a rich, layered narrative that wove together hardship, love, faith, and the immigrant experience. It was a testament to resilience and the ways in which our ancestors carried pieces of their old lives with them to new lands. The broom, it turns out, was more than just a cleaning implement. It was a symbol, a connection to a past that my grandmother risked everything to leave behind. It represented home, not just the physical house she grew up in, but the entire world she knew before coming to this country. It stood for the traditions, beliefs, and superstitions that helped her navigate a new and uncertain life. As my grandmother began to speak, her eyes twinkling with memories long dormant, I realized that this seemingly simple tradition was actually a complex tapestry of cultural preservation, family love, and personal history. It was a way of keeping alive the spirit of those who came before us, of honoring sacrifices made, and of maintaining a connection to our roots even as we build new lives in new places. And so, I invite you to join me on this journey of discovery as I unravel the mystery of the Christmas broom. It's a story that begins with a child's innocent question and leads us through generations of family history, cultural traditions, and the enduring power of memory. Along the way, we'll explore what it means to carry our heritage forward, how seemingly odd customs often hold profound meaning, and why these rituals continue to shape our sense of identity and belonging. Because in the end, the story of the hidden broom is really the story of all our families, of the strange and wonderful ways we preserve our past while embracing our future, and of the invisible threads that connect us to those who came before us, shaping who we are and who we will become. Dear viewer, make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. Sometimes subscriptions can be automatically cancelled, so it's always good to double-check. While you're at it, consider becoming a channel member. As a member, you'll enjoy amazing perks like watching our content ad-free. You can also support our work by sending a thanks. Your contribution helps us invest in better tools and improve the quality of our productions. Join us on this journey and become part of our community. Oh, and let us know in the comments which city you're listening from and what time it is there right now. The first time I truly noticed the broom's disappearance, I was probably 7 or 8 years old enough to understand that this was something unusual but still too young to grasp the significance. I remember it clearly because it was the year my cousin Maria came to stay with us for Christmas. She was older than me, all of 12, and she had recently moved from my grandparents' farm to our suburban home. To me, she was the epitome of sophistication and knowledge. "It's gone again," Maria announced one morning, standing in the kitchen with her hands on her hips. "What's gone?" I asked, following her gaze around the room. "The broom," she said, pointing toward the corner where it usually leaned. "Every year, right before Christmas, it disappears." I looked around, confused. Where could it be? "Mom just swept the kitchen floor yesterday." "Exactly," Maria replied with a knowing smile. "That's why it's strange. Someone always sweeps, then poof, the broom is gone." For the rest of that day, I became a detective. I checked the broom closet, the garage, even the basement where we stored things we didn't use often. Nothing. The broom had vanished without a trace. "Grandma," I said that evening, sidling up to her while she was kneading dough for what smelled like Christmas cookies. "Where's the broom?" She looked at me, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Why, my dear, the broom is taking a little holiday. It needs a rest before the big day." "But it just worked yesterday," I argued. "Doesn't it get tired of sweeping all year?" Grandma laughed, a warm, musical sound that made the kitchen feel cozier. "Oh, the broom doesn't mind working. But every Christmas, it gets to go on a special trip. To the North Pole, perhaps, to help Santa with his sleigh." I wasn't convinced. Santa had reindeer for his sleigh, he didn't need a broom. But Grandma's explanation was good enough for that year, and I let it go. The next year, I was more observant. I watched as Christmas approached, noting the exact day the broom disappeared. It was always the same, the Sunday after the second Advent candle was lit. Not a day sooner, not a day later. And it always reappeared on December 26th, sometimes leaning against the back door, sometimes propped up in the garage, but always accessible again. "Mom," I asked one morning, watching as she swept the kitchen floor with the broom, "why do we hide the broom every Christmas?" She stopped sweeping and looked at me, her expression softening. "Oh, sweetie, we don't hide it. We just give it a special place to rest during the holidays. It's a family tradition." "But why?" I persisted. "Why can't it stay in the kitchen where it belongs?" My mother sighed, leaning the broom against the counter. "It's just something we've always done. Your grandmother's mother did it, and her mother before her. Some traditions don't have reasons, they just are." That answer frustrated me. I liked reasons. I liked logic. The broom tradition made no sense, but everyone treated it as perfectly normal. The year I turned 10, I decided I would solve the mystery once and for all. I stayed up late on Christmas Eve, determined to catch whoever was moving the broom. I crept downstairs at midnight, tiptoeing past the tree with its gifts still wrapped, and peered into the kitchen. The broom was there, leaning against the wall exactly where it should be. Confused, I went back to bed, resolved to wake up extra early the next morning. When dawn came, I was the first one up. I rushed to the kitchen, only to find it empty. The broom had vanished again. This time, I asked my father when he came downstairs for coffee. "Dad, where does the broom go every Christmas?" He poured himself a cup, then looked at me over the rim of his mug. "That's a good question, kiddo. You know, I've always wondered that myself." "You don't know?" I asked, surprised. He chuckled. "Oh, I've heard the stories. Your grandmother says it's to keep the bad spirits away during the holidays. My father always said it was so Santa wouldn't trip over it. Who knows? Maybe it's just a game we all play without realizing it. A game? I said, my mind racing. But everyone acts so serious about it. Grandma gets upset if someone moves it before Christmas. Well, my father said, his voice dropping slightly, there might be something to that. Your grandmother comes from a place where traditions mattered more than anything. Sometimes, when you're far from home, the little things keep you connected to where you came from. That was the most satisfying answer I'd received yet. It made sense to me even if I didn't completely understand it, at least it gave the tradition some weight, some purpose beyond just being odd. As I got older, I stopped asking about the broom. It was just another Christmas quirk, like my Uncle Bob's annual argument with the Christmas tree lights or my cousin Maria's insistence on singing Jingle Bells in 3 different languages. It was part of the fabric of our holidays, familiar and comforting in its strangeness. The year I was 16, something happened that almost broke the tradition. My grandmother had been sick with the flu, Christmas was just 3 days away, and no one had remembered to hide the broom. It was leaning against the kitchen wall where it always was, completely visible. Someone needs to put that away, my grandmother said weakly from the couch when she noticed it. It's not right to leave it out. My mother rushed to her side. Mom, you're sick. Don't worry about the broom. No, my grandmother insisted, sitting up straighter. It has to be hidden. Before sunrise on Christmas Eve. Always. But why, Grandma? I asked, kneeling beside her. What happens if it's not hidden? She looked at me, her eyes suddenly clear and sharp, despite her illness. The spirits can get in, she said quietly. Bad things can happen to the family. It's not safe. I exchanged a glance with my mother, who just shrugged slightly. The broom was hidden that night, and Christmas proceeded as usual, but my grandmother's words stuck with me. Spirits? Bad things? It sounded like something from a fairy tale, not something my practical, no-nonsense grandmother would believe in. The broom tradition continued through the years, a silent, unspoken part of our Christmas celebrations. When I went away to college, I noticed its absence during the holidays, and when I came home for Christmas, I always looked forward to the moment it would disappear, then reappear. It was like a clockwork ritual, marking the passage of time in a way nothing else did. When I got married and had children of my own, I carried the tradition with me. The first Christmas in our new home, my husband looked at me curiously as I swept the kitchen floor, then carefully placed the broom in the garage behind the Christmas decorations. What are you doing? He asked. It's a tradition, I said simply. My family always hides the broom before Christmas. Why? He persisted. I don't know, I admitted. No one ever really explained it. But it's important to me. My daughter, Lily, was only 3 that year, but she noticed the broom was missing. Mommy, where's the broom? She asked, looking around the kitchen. It's taking a Christmas vacation, I said, repeating the words my grandmother had used with me. Lily nodded seriously, accepting this explanation as children do, and moved on to other things. But as she grew older, the questions came, just as they had with me. Mom, why do we hide the broom every Christmas? She asked one morning, watching as I swept the floor. I looked at her, seeing my own childhood curiosity reflected in her eyes. It's a family tradition, I said. Something my grandmother taught me. But why? She persisted. What's the reason? And that's when I realized I had reached a crossroads. For years, I had accepted this tradition without question, passing it down as I had received it. But my daughter deserved more than that. She deserved to know why, to understand the significance behind what seemed like such a peculiar custom. As I looked at Lily, waiting for an answer I didn't have, I knew it was time to finally uncover the truth about the Christmas broom. It was time to ask the questions I should have asked years ago, to dig beneath the surface of this strange family tradition and discover what really lay beneath. What I found would change the way I understood my family, my heritage, and the meaning of Christmas itself. The decision to finally uncover the truth behind the broom tradition came to me one afternoon as I was decorating the house with my daughter Lily. She was carefully hanging ornaments on the lower branches of our Christmas tree, her small fingers fumbling with the hooks, while I was stringing lights across the mantelpiece. The familiar scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air, transporting me back to countless childhood holidays in my parents' home. Mommy, Lily said, holding up a delicate glass ornament shaped like a broom. Why does Grandma always hide the real broom at Christmas? I paused, the strand of lights momentarily forgotten in my hands. The little ornament in her hand seemed to mock me with its simplicity. Here was my opportunity to give my daughter the answer I had never received, to break the cycle of vague explanations and mysterious smiles. I think it's time we found out, sweetheart, I said, setting down the lights and kneeling beside her. Would you like to help me solve this mystery? Lily's eyes lit up with excitement. Yes. Can we call Grandma right now? And so began what I came to think of as the Great Broom Investigation. I started with my mother, calling her one evening after Lily had gone to bed. When I asked about the broom tradition, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that," my mother said, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. "That's just something your grandmother's family did. They came from the old country, you know, and brought all sorts of traditions with them." "What country, exactly?" I pressed. "Well, your grandmother never liked to talk much about where she came from," my mother admitted. "She said it was a sad place, and she didn't want to bring that sadness into our new life here. But I think it was somewhere in Eastern Europe. Poland, maybe, or Ukraine. She had a slight accent when she first came to America, but she lost it over time." "So the broom tradition is from there?" I asked. "I suppose so," my mother said. "Your grandmother said it kept away bad spirits during the holy season. Something about brooms being portals to other worlds, and needing to be closed during sacred times. Or maybe it was just practical less chance of sweeping away good luck if it's put away. Honestly, your grandmother never explained it very clearly, and I never thought to ask." My next call was to my Aunt Maria, my cousin from that childhood Christmas when I first noticed the broom's disappearance. She was older, in her 50s now, and had inherited many of my grandmother's stories and traditions. "The broom!" Aunt Maria exclaimed when I brought up the subject. "Ah, yes. I remember asking Grandma about that when I was little. She told me it was to protect the house." "Protect it from what?" I asked, leaning forward even though we were on the phone. "From evil spirits, of course," Aunt Maria said matter-of-factly. "Grandma said that during Christmas, when the veil between worlds is thin, all kinds of supernatural beings can slip through. Brooms, she said, can act as bridges between our world and theirs, so if you leave one out, you might invite something unwanted into your home." I made a mental note of this explanation, filed it away with my mother's. It was similar yet different, both involving protection, but with slightly different mechanisms. "What about other traditions?" I asked. "Did Grandma have other Christmas customs like this?" "Oh, plenty," Aunt Maria said. "She used to put a bowl of water under the bed on Christmas Eve, said it would protect the family from nightmares. She insisted we all wear new clothes on Christmas morning, something about starting fresh with the new year. She would never let us sweep on Christmas Day, either. Said it would sweep away all the good luck you'd gathered." I was fascinated. These weren't just random quirks, they formed a system of beliefs and practices that had been carefully preserved and passed down through generations. They spoke of a worldview fundamentally different from the modern, rational one I was accustomed to, one where the spiritual and physical worlds were intertwined, where objects held power beyond their practical functions. My investigation led me to my Uncle Robert, Grandma's son, who lived in a small town several hours away. When I asked about the broom tradition, he surprised me with a completely different explanation. "That's not about spirits," Uncle Robert said when I visited him one Saturday afternoon. "That's about poverty." I blinked, caught off guard. "Poverty? What does hiding a broom have to do with poverty?" "Everything," he said, pouring me a cup of tea. "You see, when we were first starting out, your grandmother and grandfather had nothing. Nothing. They worked in factories, lived in a tiny apartment, barely made ends meet. Christmas was especially hard, watching other families with presents, with food, with warmth, while they had so little." He paused, his eyes distant, looking back through time. "One year, a neighbor, a wealthy woman who took pity on them, gave your grandmother a broom for Christmas. It wasn't just any broom, it was made of fine materials, with a sturdy handle and tight bristles. It was the nicest thing they owned at the time." I leaned in, caught up in the story despite myself. "Your grandmother treasured that broom," Uncle Robert continued. "It represented dignity in a life that had very little. It was a symbol of caring, of generosity, of someone seeing their struggle and responding with kindness. Every Christmas, she would hide it as a way of honoring that gift, of preserving its meaning. It wasn't about superstition, it was about memory and gratitude." I sat back, absorbing this new perspective. The broom as a symbol of dignity and gratitude rather than protection from spirits. It was completely different from what I'd heard before, yet somehow it felt more authentic, more grounded in the practical realities of my grandmother's life. "Did Grandma ever tell you this herself?" I asked. Uncle Robert shook his head. "No. She never spoke of it directly. But I remember that broom. I remember how carefully she would treat it, how she would polish the handle and store it in a special place when it wasn't in use. And I remember how every Christmas, without fail, she would make sure it was hidden away." As I continued my investigation, speaking to other relatives, gathering bits and pieces of information, I began to see that the broom tradition wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger tapestry of customs, beliefs, and practices that had been carefully woven together over generations. Some had practical origins, like the prohibition on sweeping on Christmas Day, which likely prevented accidentally sweeping away decorations or good luck charms. Others had spiritual significance, like the bowl of water under the bed, which seemed to draw on European folk beliefs about protection. And still others had personal meaning, like the broom itself, which appeared to be tied to specific memories and experiences in my grandmother's life. What struck me most was how these traditions had evolved over time. The explanations had changed, adapted to fit the beliefs and understandings of each new generation. What began as a practical measure to protect a cherished possession had become a spiritual ritual, then a family mystery, and finally a tradition without a clear purpose, yet still observed with the same care and reverence. I found myself wondering about the nature of tradition itself. Why do we continue practices whose origins may be lost to us? Is it because they connect us to our past, to those who came before us? Is it because they provide structure and meaning to our celebrations? Or is it simply because they are familiar, comfortable anchors in a rapidly changing world? As my investigation continued, I felt increasingly pulled toward one person above all others: my grandmother herself. She was the keeper of these traditions, the living link to a past that was rapidly fading. If anyone could give me definitive answers, it was she. But I also worried that asking might open wounds she had long since closed, might bring back memories she had chosen to leave behind. The decision was made for me when I received a call from my mother one morning. "Your grandmother isn't doing well," she said, her voice tight with concern. "The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. If you want to talk to her about anything, now would be the time." My heart sank. The urgency of my question suddenly seemed trivial in the face of mortality. Yet I knew that if I didn't ask now, I might never have the chance. With a mix of apprehension and determination, I made arrangements to visit my grandmother the following day, armed with my years of questions and my newfound understanding of the possible meanings behind her broom tradition. As I prepared for the visit, I found myself thinking about all the different explanations I had gathered: the spiritual, the practical, the personal. Which one would she confirm? Or would she offer yet another perspective entirely? The broom, which had seemed such a simple object, had become a complex symbol representing family history, cultural heritage, personal memory, and the passage of time itself. Whatever truth she shared, I knew it would be the beginning of understanding not just about a broom, but about the woman who had guarded it so carefully all these years, and about the family she had shaped through these small, seemingly insignificant rituals. The mystery was about to be solved, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might discover. The Christmas we almost broke tradition is etched in my memory with the clarity of a photograph. It was the winter I turned 13, a year of transition that found me caught between childhood and adolescence, skepticism and belief. My grandmother had been diagnosed with breast cancer earlier that year, and though she was in remission, the experience had changed her. She was quieter now, more reflective, yet somehow more determined than ever to preserve the family traditions she had carried with her through decades of change. That particular Christmas Eve dawned bright and cold, with frost patterns decorating the windowpanes like lace. My grandmother had been adamant about hosting Christmas dinner this year, despite our offers to take over. "This is my kitchen," she had declared with surprising firmness. "These are my recipes. We'll do things properly." We had spent the morning preparing the feast, kneading dough for pau de mel, stirring pots of feijoada, grinding spices for the Christmas cookies that would be served with afternoon coffee. The house smelled of cinnamon, cloves, and something else, something medicinal that I recognized from my grandmother's chemotherapy treatments. It was a scent that didn't belong in a Christmas kitchen, yet somehow had become part of the backdrop that year. As afternoon turned to evening, the family began to arrive. My parents, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, and various other relatives filled the house with chatter and laughter. My grandmother presided over it all from her armchair by the fireplace, directing with a wave of her hand or a soft suggestion. She looked pale, thinner than I had ever seen her, but her eyes sparkled with their usual intensity. The afternoon passed in a blur of gift-giving and reminiscing. We sang carols, some of them in the old language my grandmother still used when reciting certain prayers. We shared stories of Christmases past, and my grandmother listened with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I noticed her glancing toward the kitchen several times, her brow furrowed with anxiety. "What's wrong, Grandma?" I asked, kneeling beside her chair. She patted my hand. "Nothing, my dear. Just making sure everything is ready for tomorrow." But I knew something was wrong. The broom was still leaning against the kitchen wall, visible to anyone who walked through the room. In all my years of Christmases, I had never seen it left out this late in the evening. By this time, it should have been hidden away in its secret spot. I mentioned it to my mother when she passed by, carrying a tray of empty glasses. "Oh, that's right," she said, her face paling slightly. "With Grandma not feeling well, I completely forgot." "Do we need to hide it now?" I asked. My mother looked toward the living room, where my grandmother was entertaining the children with a story. "Maybe not tonight," she whispered. "Let her enjoy this Christmas without worrying about traditions. We can take care of it in the morning before everyone wakes up." I felt a prickle of unease. This felt wrong, like breaking an unspoken law. But I said nothing, trusting my mother's judgment. The family eventually departed, leaving just our nuclear family to clean up and prepare for the next day. My grandmother retired to her bedroom early, exhausted from the day's festivities. My parents and I stayed up late, finishing the kitchen cleanup, then sat by the Christmas tree sipping hot chocolate. "It's been a hard year for her," my father said, stirring his drink. "Maybe we should let some traditions slide this Christmas." My mother nodded. "I think she knows that. She just wanted things to feel normal again." I said nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad might happen. The broom still stood in the kitchen, a silent sentinel ignored by everyone except me. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I woke early, as excited as any child on Christmas morning, and made my way to the living room where the Christmas tree stood, surrounded by wrapped gifts. As I approached the tree, I noticed something unusual. The gifts my sister and I had placed under the tree the night before were still there, untouched. There should have been a small pile from Santa, but there was nothing. Confused, I turned to look toward the kitchen, where the sounds of my parents moving about could be heard. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. "Is Santa coming?" My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "I don't think so, sweetheart." The house was eerily quiet. No jingle bells, no reindeer tracks in the snow outside, no sign that Santa had visited at all. Just empty space under the tree and a strange, heavy silence in the air. "Maybe he's running late," my father said, trying to sound cheerful as he came into the room. "Let's give him some time." But as the morning wore on, no Santa came. No presents appeared. The children in the family grew restless, then upset. My youngest cousin, who had been staying with us, began to cry, unable to understand why Santa had skipped our house. My grandmother emerged from her room mid-morning, looking refreshed but still thin and fragile. She took in the scene: disappointed children, empty space under the tree, the adults' strained expressions, and her eyes widened with recognition. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice sharp with panic. "Where's what, Mom?" my father asked gently. "The broom," she exclaimed, looking around frantically. "Did someone move the broom? Is it hidden?" My mother stepped forward. "Mother, I'm so sorry. With everything going on, we forgot to hide it. I was going to take care of it this morning, but..." "It's too late," my grandmother whispered, her face ashen. "The spirits have already come." She made her way slowly to the kitchen, leaning heavily on the doorframe. There, leaning against the wall, was the broom. The sight seemed to drain the last bit of strength from her. "Grandma," I said, stepping forward. "What's going to happen? Is everyone okay?" She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a depth of fear I had never seen before. "The broom wasn't hidden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The veil between worlds is thin on Christmas Eve. When the broom is left out, it creates a bridge. The spirits can cross over." She pointed toward the Christmas tree. "They've marked our house. Santa won't come now. The children's wishes won't be granted. Bad luck will follow us all year." I looked at the empty space under the tree, at the disappointed faces of the children, at my grandmother's devastated expression. Could it be possible? Had the failure to hide the broom really caused this catastrophe? My father, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Mother, that's nonsense. Santa doesn't come to every house on Christmas. There are 100 reasons the presents might not be here: weather, traffic, who knows. It has nothing to do with a broom." But my grandmother shook her head stubbornly. "You don't understand," she insisted. "This is how things work. This is what happens when the old ways are ignored." Throughout the day, small things went wrong. The turkey we had planned for Christmas dinner burned in the oven. My cousin fell and scraped her knee on the icy sidewalk. My father received a call that his elderly aunt had been hospitalized. Nothing catastrophic, but a series of unfortunate events that, in my grandmother's mind, confirmed her worst fears. By evening, as we gathered for a simple meal of canned soup and sandwiches instead of the feast that had been planned, the mood in the house was somber. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, her hands trembling as she blessed the meager meal. "We must make amends," she said, her voice resolute despite her frail appearance. "Tomorrow, before dawn, we will hide the broom properly. We will say the prayers, perform the rituals. We will restore the protection." My parents exchanged worried glances, but they nodded in agreement. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the silence of a Christmas without the usual magic, I found myself believing my grandmother. Not because I thought spirits had actually crossed over, but because I had seen the genuine fear in her eyes, the conviction in her voice. This tradition wasn't just a quirky habit to her, it was essential to her sense of order, to her understanding of how the world worked. The next morning, before dawn, my grandmother insisted on performing the broom-hiding ritual herself. She woke us all at 4 a.m., her face grim with determination. She led us to the kitchen, where the broom still stood against the wall. "Each of you must touch the broom," she instructed, her voice strong and clear. "Then we will carry it to its special place." We followed her instructions, a procession of sleepy family members carrying the broom to the attic, where she had a special chest for it. She placed it inside, then closed and locked the chest. "Now," she said, turning to face us, "the protection is restored. But this Christmas is marked. We must be careful in the coming year." That Christmas was unlike any other. The disappointment of the morning was eventually replaced by the warmth of family togetherness, but the shadow of the hidden broom lingered. My grandmother watched over us all with an intensity that bordered on fear, interpreting every small mishap as a consequence of the broken tradition. As the year progressed, small problems did arise. My mother lost her job, my sister had health issues, my father's business faced difficulties. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to keep my grandmother convinced that her predictions had come true. That Christmas taught me something important about tradition. It wasn't just about following rules or preserving customs, it was about maintaining a connection to something larger than ourselves, about creating a framework of meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and random. For my grandmother, the broom ritual was a way of asserting control over forces she couldn't understand, of protecting her family from the uncertainties of life. As I grew older, I never forgot that Christmas. It became a touchstone in my understanding of family traditions, a reminder that even seemingly odd customs often serve deeper purposes: psychological, emotional, spiritual. They connect us to our past, to those who came before us, and to a collective wisdom that transcends individual experience. Now, as I prepare to visit my grandmother in her final days, I find myself thinking about that Christmas more than ever. The broom tradition, which had seemed so mysterious and inexplicable, had taken on new significance for me. It was tied to my grandmother's illness, to her fear of losing control, to her desperate attempts to preserve the world as she knew it. What I didn't understand then, what I might finally understand now, was that the broom wasn't just about protection from spirits or bad luck. It was about my grandmother's own mortality, about her fear that when she was gone, the traditions she held so dear would disappear with her. The hidden broom was a metaphor for the hidden parts of ourselves, the stories and beliefs we carry but rarely share, the legacies we hope to leave behind. As I drove to the nursing home where my grandmother now lived, I thought about all the Christmases that had passed since that one when the broom wasn't hidden. I thought about how the tradition had continued, year after year, without fail. I thought about the questions I had gathered in my investigation, the different explanations I had heard, and the one truth I still sought. When I finally stepped into her room, the smell of antiseptic and old age replacing the cinnamon and pine of Christmas past, I knew this conversation would be different. This time, I wasn't just asking about a broom or a tradition. I was asking about my grandmother's life, her beliefs, her legacy. I was seeking understanding before it was too late. The nursing home smelled of antiseptic and old age, a scent that somehow managed to be both clean and melancholic. I walked slowly down the hallway, my shoes making soft squeaking sounds on the polished floor, until I reached room 307. My grandmother lay in the bed, her once vibrant face now pale and lined, her hands resting on the blanket that covered her frail body. When I entered, her eyes lit up with recognition, a brief spark in the fading light of her old age. "Come in, my dear," she said, her voice weaker than I remembered but still carrying the same warmth that had defined my childhood. "I've been waiting for you." I pulled up a chair beside her bed and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, the skin paper thin, but still surprisingly strong. "How are you feeling, Grandma?" She smiled faintly. "As well as can be expected. The doctors say I don't have much time left, but I've heard that before." Her eyes twinkled with the familiar defiance that had always been part of her character. "So tell me, what brings you to visit your old grandmother on this cold December day?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. This conversation felt heavier than I had anticipated. "I've been thinking about Christmas traditions," I said finally. "About the broom." Grandma's expression changed instantly. The playful light in her eyes vanished, replaced by something I couldn't quite read: sadness, perhaps, or regret. "Ah, the broom. That old thing. Do you want to tell me about it?" I asked gently. "The real story?" I've been asking around, and everyone has different theories. Some say it's to keep away bad spirits. Others say it's about protecting something special. My Uncle Robert thinks it might be connected to when you first came to America. Grandma was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They're all partly right. But not completely. The real story is complicated. I leaned closer, giving her the time she needed to gather her thoughts. I'm listening, Grandma. I want to understand. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. It starts before I came to America. I was just a girl, maybe 16, living in a small village in what was then Poland. My family were farmers, poor but proud. We had a small house, a few animals, and not much else. Her eyes seemed to focus on the past now, seeing things I couldn't see. That winter was particularly hard. The snow came early and stayed late. Food was scarce, and we worried about making it through until spring. But there was something else that frightened us more than hunger or cold. She paused, her fingers tightening slightly around mine. There were soldiers. Occupying forces. They patrolled our village, taking what they wanted, intimidating the people. They didn't respect our traditions, our beliefs, our way of life. They laughed at our customs, mocked our religious practices. I listened, caught up in the story despite myself. This was a side of my grandmother's past I had never heard before. One day, she continued, a soldier came to our house. He was drunk and aggressive, demanding food and threatening violence. My father tried to reason with him, but the soldier struck him, knocking him to the ground. My mother tried to intervene, and he turned his attention to her. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm room. Grandma's voice remained steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. That's when I saw the broom, she said. It was leaning against the wall in the corner of the room. In that moment, something came over me. I don't know what instinct, perhaps, or desperation. I grabbed the broom and hit the soldier across the back with it as hard as I could. She stopped, her breathing becoming slightly ragged. The memory seemed to be taking its toll on her. He turned around, surprised by the attack. He reached for his gun, and I thought for sure he would kill me. But then my oldest sister ran into the room, screaming and crying, distracting him just long enough for my father to grab an axe from the woodpile. The soldier, seeing my father with the weapon, backed away and left, promising to return with reinforcements. Grandma closed her eyes for a moment, as if the memory was too painful to keep them open. We were terrified all that night, expecting the soldiers to come back. But they didn't. The next morning, we packed what little we could carry, some clothes, food, my mother's wedding ring, and the broom. We fled the village under cover of darkness, eventually making our way to America. I stared at her, speechless. The broom, which had seemed such a mundane object, was suddenly imbued with significance I could never have imagined. It wasn't just a cleaning implement, it was a weapon, a symbol of resistance, a reminder of the violence that had driven her family from their home. Why did you hide it at Christmas? I asked, my voice barely audible. Grandma's eyes opened, filled with tears. Because on Christmas, I remember. I remember that night, the fear, the violence, the broom in my hands. It was the weapon that protected us, that gave us the chance to escape. But it was also a reminder of what we lost: our home, our security, our way of life. She paused, collecting her thoughts. When we first came to America, we had nothing. The broom was one of the few possessions we brought with us. It represented our survival, our resilience. Every Christmas, I hid it to honor that memory, not to keep away spirits, but to acknowledge the cost of our freedom, to remember those who didn't make it, to honor the strength of my family in the face of unspeakable hardship. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. When you were children, and you asked about the broom, I didn't tell you the truth. I couldn't. It was too painful, too raw. The stories about spirits and protection, I made those up because they were easier to explain than the truth. I felt tears welling in my eyes as I absorbed the weight of her confession. The mystery that had haunted my entire childhood had such a profound, heartbreaking origin. That Christmas when the broom wasn't hidden, Grandma said, her expression grave, I wasn't worried about spirits or bad luck. I was worried that without the ritual, without the reminder, we would forget. I was afraid that the memory of what we had been through, of the sacrifices made, would fade away. She reached up with her free hand and touched my cheek. That broom, my dear, is more than just a tradition. It's a legacy. It represents all that my family endured to give us the life we have today. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, we can find strength, and that our past shapes who we become. As I sat there, holding my grandmother's hand and listening to her story, I understood something profound about family traditions. They aren't just customs we follow without question, they're threads that connect us to our history, to those who came before us, and to the experiences that shaped us. The broom tradition wasn't about superstition or practicality, it was about memory, about honoring the past while building the future. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Grandma smiled faintly. It's part of who I am. And now, you know the truth. The tradition is yours now, to pass on to your children if you wish. But more importantly, the story is yours. Never forget where you come from, my dear. Never forget the sacrifices that were made for you. As I prepared to leave, the weight of her words settling in my heart, I realized that this revelation had changed everything. The broom tradition, which had seemed so mysterious and inexplicable, now made perfect sense. It was a tangible connection to my grandmother's past, a way of preserving a story that might otherwise be lost. Before I could say goodbye, Grandma squeezed my hand. There's something I want to give you, she said. Something in her tone made me pause. She gestured toward the nightstand beside her bed. Open that drawer. I slid open the drawer and found a small, wooden box wrapped in faded cloth. As I lifted it out, I recognized it immediately. It was the same chest where the broom had been hidden every Christmas of my memory. Inside, Grandma instructed, you'll find the broom. And something else. Something I've kept all these years. I opened the box carefully. Wrapped in tissue paper was indeed the broom, older and more worn than I remembered, but still recognizable. Tucked beside it was a small, leather-bound book with yellowed pages. Grandma's eyes sparkled with tears. That's my mother's diary. It tells the full story, what happened before we left, the journey, the early years in America. I never had the courage to read it all these years, but now I think it's time. I looked from the broom to the diary to my grandmother's face, understanding dawning. You want me to take them? She nodded. Yes. Take them home. Read the diary. Understand our complete story. And when you're ready, share it with Lily. Let her know where she comes from, what her family endured to give her the life she has now. I closed the box carefully, feeling the weight of history in my hands. This wasn't just a family tradition anymore, it was a legacy. A responsibility. And as I held it, I knew that my understanding of the broom, of my grandmother, and of my own identity had been forever transformed. But as I prepared to leave, a question formed in my mind, one that would lead me to the next part of this journey. If the broom represented such a painful chapter in my grandmother's past, why had she preserved it with such care all these years? And what other secrets might be hidden within the pages of that journal, secrets that could change everything I thought I knew about my family's history? The revelation was just beginning. The true story of the Christmas broom was far more complex and more important than I had ever imagined. The drive home from the nursing home was different from any I had taken before. The wooden box containing the broom and my grandmother's diary sat on the passenger seat, its weight pressing down on me both literally and figuratively. Outside, snowflakes began to fall, dusting the landscape in white as if trying to blanket the world in purity. I welcomed it. This cleansing snow felt like a metaphor for what I was experiencing, a fresh understanding of my family's history, clearing away the mysteries to reveal the truth beneath. When I arrived home, my husband greeted me with concern. How was it? He asked, taking my coat and noticing the fatigue in my eyes. I need some time alone, I said, clutching the box. There's something I need to read. My eyes fell on the diary as I sat at the kitchen table, the familiar scent of pine needles from our Christmas tree filling the air. The leather cover was worn smooth, the edges frayed from years of handling. My grandmother had kept this all these years, preserving it as carefully as she had preserved the broom. With trembling fingers, I opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant yet faded, my great-grandmother's script flowing across the yellowed pages. The entries began in the small Polish village my grandmother had described, years before the traumatic event she had shared with me. I read through accounts of daily life, planting seasons, harvests, religious festivals, family celebrations. My ancestors weren't just characters in a story, they were real people, with hopes and dreams, struggles and joys, much like anyone else. As I read deeper into the diary, I discovered something unexpected. My great-grandmother had documented the growing tensions in their village, the increasing oppression by occupying forces, the fear that had gradually replaced the peaceful rhythms of their former life. She wrote of the night my grandmother used the broom as a weapon, with a detail my grandmother had omitted. The soldier had been alone, separated from his unit, a young man who had been drinking and had lost his way. He was just a boy, really, my great-grandmother had written. Scared and confused as much as we were. When your grandmother hit him with the broom, instead of anger, he looked frightened of us, frightened of what he had become. He left without further incident, and we never saw him again. I sat back, stunned. The image in my mind of a violent oppressor transformed into something more complex, a frightened young man caught in circumstances beyond his control. My grandmother's narrative had been framed by survival, her focus understandably on protecting her family. But the diary revealed a more nuanced reality, where the line between victim and oppressor wasn't always clear. The diary continued, describing their flight from Poland, the arduous journey to America, and the early years of building a new life. My great-grandmother documented the challenges of starting over, the loneliness of being in a foreign land, the determination to preserve their cultural identity while embracing their new home. "We will not forget who we are," she had written. "But we will also become something new American Polish, not just one or the other. Our traditions will be our bridge between worlds." Reading those words, I understood something profound about the broom tradition. It wasn't just about remembering a traumatic event or preserving a connection to the past. It was about balance, honoring where they came from while embracing where they were going. The hidden broom represented the duality of immigrant experience, the pain of leaving and the hope of building anew. As I continued reading, I discovered another layer of meaning. My great-grandmother had written about Christmas celebrations in their new home, how they tried to blend Polish traditions with American customs. The broom tradition, she explained, served multiple purposes. It was a way to preserve a specific piece of their heritage, a tangible connection to their past, and a teaching tool for younger generations about family history. "The broom is more than wood and bristles," she had written. "It is memory made physical. When our children ask why it disappears each Christmas, they are not just asking about an object. They are asking about who we are, where we came from, and why we continue to honor these traditions even in a new land." Tears welled in my eyes as I read these words. The broom tradition wasn't just about superstition or practicality, it was about storytelling. It was a way to pass down family history in a way that was memorable and meaningful, turning an ordinary object into a vessel for extraordinary meaning. The diary continued for several generations, showing how the tradition evolved. My grandmother's mother had added her own interpretation, emphasizing gratitude for the opportunities in America while still honoring their roots. My grandmother had further adapted it, focusing on resilience in the face of hardship. And my own mother, I discovered, had added her own perspective, finding hope and renewal in the Christmas season even while acknowledging the past. Each generation had made the tradition their own, yet the core purpose remained the same: to connect the present to the past, to honor those who came before, and to pass on the values that had sustained the family through difficult times. When I finally closed the diary hours later, the kitchen was dark except for the Christmas tree lights. My husband came in, finding me sitting at the table, the box open before me, tears drying on my cheeks. "What did you find?" he asked gently, pulling up a chair beside me. I showed him the diary, sharing what I had learned about our family's history, about the broom's true meaning. As I spoke, I realized something important: this knowledge wasn't just for me. It was part of our family's legacy, and it needed to be shared. The next morning, I woke early, determined to share this revelation with my daughter Lily. She was now 12, old enough to understand the complexity of family history, young enough to approach it with the open-mindedness that children often possess. Over breakfast, I told her about my conversation with her great-grandmother, about the diary I had read, about the true story behind the broom tradition. I showed her the broom, explaining how it had been a weapon, a symbol of resistance, and later a connection to heritage. Lily listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity. "So when we hide the broom at Christmas," she said, "we're remembering all that?" I nodded. "We're honoring our ancestors, remembering their strength, and acknowledging where we come from. But we're also celebrating how far we've come." That afternoon, we performed the broom hiding ritual together. For the first time, I explained the true significance of the tradition as we placed the broom in its special hiding place. Lily's understanding transformed the ritual from a mysterious custom into a meaningful act of remembrance and connection. As we worked together, I thought about how this revelation had changed my perspective on all our family traditions. The strange foods we ate at Christmas, the particular songs we sang, the way we decorated our tree, these weren't just random customs. They were threads in a larger tapestry, each one carrying pieces of our family's story, values, and identity. The broom tradition, once so mysterious, had become a lens through which I could view all our customs with deeper understanding. It wasn't about superstition or practicality, it was about continuity, about preserving the essence of who we were while embracing who we were becoming. That evening, as I sat by the Christmas tree reflecting on everything I had learned, I found myself thinking about my grandmother's words: "Never forget where you come from." The broom tradition was more than just a way to honor the past, it was a way to ensure that future generations would understand their roots, appreciate their heritage, and carry forward the values that had sustained the family through generations of change. As I prepared for bed, I placed the wooden box containing the broom and diary on the mantelpiece beside the Christmas stockings. In that moment, I understood that this tradition wasn't just about my grandmother or even my immediate family, it was part of something larger, a continuum connecting past, present, and future. The next morning, I received a call from my mother. "Your grandmother passed away peacefully in the night," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She was surrounded by love." I wasn't surprised, but I felt a profound sense of loss. Yet as I thought about my grandmother's life and legacy, I also felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had shared her story, preserved her history, and entrusted me with continuing the tradition in a way that honored its true meaning. The funeral was a week later, a blend of traditional Polish rituals and American customs. As we gathered to remember my grandmother, I found myself thinking about the broom tradition and how it might evolve in the future. What would it mean for my children and grandchildren? How would they make it their own while preserving its essence? These questions led me to consider how I might adapt the tradition for my own family, ensuring that it would continue to have meaning in changing times. The broom had already evolved from practical tool to weapon to symbol. What would it become next? And how could I ensure that future generations would understand its significance? As I stood at the graveside, the snow beginning to fall once more, I realized that the tradition was not static. It was alive, growing and changing with each generation, just as my family had grown and changed. The challenge wasn't just to preserve the tradition, but to ensure that it remained relevant and meaningful to those who would follow. With these thoughts in mind, I returned home determined to find ways to honor my grandmother's legacy while adapting the tradition for the future. The broom had been hidden at Christmas for generations. Now it was time to ensure that its true meaning would never be hidden again. The first Christmas after my grandmother's passing was different from any that had come before. The house was filled with the familiar scents of cinnamon and pine. The same decorations that had adorned our home for years were in their usual places, and the same carols played softly in the background. Yet there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed. As I prepared for the holiday, I found myself thinking constantly about the broom tradition, wondering how I might honor my grandmother's memory while adapting the practice for our contemporary family. That year, I decided to approach the tradition with intentionality rather than ritual. I gathered Lily and my husband in the living room one afternoon, the wooden box containing the broom and diary sitting on the coffee table between us. "This Christmas," I began, "we're going to do something different with the broom tradition. We're going to create our own version, one that honors where we come from while reflecting who we are today." Lily's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What do you mean?" I opened the box and carefully took out the broom, its bristles worn smooth by decades of use. "This broom has a story," I said, running my fingers along its worn handle. "It's been part of our family for generations, first in Poland, then in America. It's witnessed hardship and joy, survival and celebration." As I spoke, I noticed how differently Lily was looking at the broom. No longer was it just a cleaning implement. She was seeing it as an artifact, a tangible connection to our family's past. "We're going to hide it again this Christmas," I continued, "but with a new element. Before we put it away, each of us will write down something we're grateful for this year, something that represents our family's values and journey. We'll place these notes with the broom, and when we bring it out next year, we'll read them together, adding new ones each time." My husband nodded in agreement. "I like that. It creates a living tradition, one that grows with our family." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, my husband and I sat by the Christmas tree, writing our notes of gratitude. I wrote about resilience and the courage to carry difficult stories forward. He wrote about love and the importance of staying connected to our roots. And we both wrote about Lily, about how grateful we were for her inquisitive mind and open heart. On Christmas Eve, as snow began to fall outside, we gathered once again to perform the ritual. Lily had written about her appreciation for learning our family story, about how it made her feel connected to something larger than herself. With great solemnity, we placed the broom and our notes in its special hiding place, not just in the attic, but in a decorative wooden chest we had purchased for this purpose, a chest that would become a family heirloom in its own right. As we closed the chest, I realized something important. The tradition had evolved from a hidden mystery to an intentional practice of reflection and gratitude. It was no longer about protecting from spirits or honoring a specific traumatic event, but about acknowledging our family's journey and celebrating how far we'd come. In the months that followed, I found myself thinking about how other families might have traditions with similar hidden meanings, traditions that seemed odd on the surface but held profound significance when understood in context. I began to document our family's story, not just for Lily, but for future generations who might otherwise lose touch with their heritage. That summer, we traveled to Poland with Lily, visiting the small village where my grandmother had grown up. Standing in the place where the broom had been used as a weapon, where my family had made the decision to leave everything behind, I felt a profound connection to my roots. We visited the cemetery where my great-grandparents were buried, placing flowers on their graves and sharing the story of how their journey had shaped our family. Lily, now 14, was deeply moved by the experience. So the broom tradition isn't just about hiding a cleaning tool, she said as we stood before the modest memorial stone. It's about remembering where we come from, about honoring those who made sacrifices for us. It's also about resilience, I added. About finding strength in difficult times and using that strength to build something new. That Christmas, as we prepared to bring the broom out of hiding, Lily suggested another evolution to the tradition. What if we create a special box for each generation, she proposed. When I have my own family someday, they can create their own chest, with their own notes of gratitude. That way, the tradition branches out, like a family tree. I was struck by her wisdom. The tradition wasn't meant to remain static, it was meant to grow, to adapt, to find new expressions in each generation while maintaining its core meaning. We implemented Lily's idea that Christmas. When we brought the broom out of hiding, we read the notes we had written the previous year, then added new ones to our family chest. Lily, now old enough to understand the nuances of family history, shared her thoughts about identity, about how understanding our roots helped her understand herself. As the years passed, the tradition continued to evolve. We incorporated elements from other cultures, blending Polish traditions with American customs and influences from Lily's friends' diverse backgrounds. We began recording our family stories on video, creating a multimedia archive that future generations could access. When Lily went off to college, she took a small replica of the broom with her, along with a copy of the diary and a notebook to continue the tradition in her own way. She called me one Christmas morning, excited to share what she had written about independence, about the challenges of starting her own life, about how her understanding of family had deepened even as she was creating distance from it. Watching her grow into a young woman who carried her family's heritage with pride while forging her own path, I understood something profound about tradition. It's not about preserving the past exactly as it was, but about carrying its essence forward in ways that remain meaningful to each new generation. The broom, once a symbol of violence and escape, had become a symbol of resilience, gratitude, and continuity. It had evolved from hidden mystery to intentional practice, from rigid ritual to living tradition. Through it, our family had found a way to acknowledge difficult history while celebrating survival and growth. Now, as Lily begins to consider starting her own family, I find myself thinking about what this tradition might become next. What new meanings will it hold for her children? How will they adapt it to reflect their own experiences and values? The answers are unwritten, as all meaningful traditions must be waiting to be discovered by those who will carry them forward. One thing remains certain: the broom will continue to have a place in our Christmas celebrations, not as an odd quirk or mysterious disappearance, but as a tangible connection to our family's past, present, and future. It will continue to remind us that even in the most difficult circumstances, we can find strength in our heritage, gratitude in our journey, and hope in the promise of tomorrow. And as we gather around our Christmas tree each year, sharing stories and creating memories, we will know that we are part of something larger than ourselves, a continuum of love, resilience, and memory stretching across generations, connecting us to those who came before us and to those who will follow. As I sit here watching snow fall gently outside my window, the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air, I find myself reflecting on the journey that began with a simple question about a missing broom. What started as childhood curiosity has evolved into a profound understanding of family, heritage, and the invisible threads that connect us to those who came before us. The broom that once seemed like such a mysterious object has become a symbol of resilience, gratitude, and the enduring power of memory. This journey has taught me that every family tradition, no matter how peculiar it might seem on the surface, carries within it layers of meaning waiting to be discovered. They are like archaeological sites, each layer representing a different moment in our family's history, each artifact a vessel containing stories, values, and wisdom passed down through generations. The broom tradition wasn't just about hiding an object, it was about preserving a narrative, keeping alive the memory of sacrifices made, and ensuring that future generations would understand the foundations upon which their lives were built. What strikes me most profoundly is how traditions evolve while maintaining their essence. The broom ritual transformed from a practical measure to protect a cherished possession, to a spiritual practice meant to ward off negative forces, to a personal reminder of family resilience, and finally to an intentional practice of reflection and gratitude. Through each transformation, the core purpose remained: to connect the present to the past, to honor those who came before, and to pass on the values that had sustained the family through difficult times. This adaptability is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of meaningful traditions. They are not meant to be frozen in time, preserved exactly as they were when first created. Rather, they are living entities that grow and change with each generation, finding new expressions while maintaining their essential meaning. The broom tradition has shown me that true heritage is not about rigidly replicating the past, but about carrying forward its spirit in ways that remain relevant to contemporary life. In a world that often feels fragmented and transient, family traditions provide anchors that connect us to something larger than ourselves. They create continuity across time and space, linking us to ancestors we may never have known and descendants we may never meet. Through rituals like hiding the broom at Christmas, we participate in a continuum that stretches beyond our individual lives, becoming part of something eternal and meaningful. As I think about the future of this tradition in my own family, I realize that its true significance lies not in its specific form, but in the values it represents, the importance of remembering, of acknowledging difficult histories, of finding strength in resilience, and of expressing gratitude for the journey that brought us to where we are today. These are values that can be expressed in countless ways, adapted to different circumstances and different generations, while maintaining their essential meaning. This Christmas season, as you gather with your loved ones, I encourage you to look beyond the surface of your own family traditions. Ask yourself what stories they tell, what values they represent, what connections they forge between past, present, and future. You might discover that seemingly odd customs like hiding a broom, wearing certain colors, eating specific foods, or following particular routines carry within them profound meanings that speak to your family's unique journey and identity. I also invite you to consider what traditions you might create or adapt for your own family. What meaningful practices could you establish that would honor your heritage while reflecting your values and circumstances? What rituals might help future generations understand where they come from and what matters most to your family? Creating intentional traditions is perhaps one of the most powerful ways to shape your family's identity and ensure that your values continue to be passed down. In the end, the story of the hidden broom is really the story of all our families. It is a reminder that we are all shaped by those who came before us, that we carry within us the legacies of countless generations, and that we have both the responsibility and the privilege of passing forward what matters most. The broom tradition, like all meaningful traditions, is not just about the past, it is about creating a bridge between generations, ensuring that the wisdom, love, and resilience of our ancestors continue to guide us as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of our own lives. As we move through this holiday season, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and scents of Christmas, let us remember that the most precious gifts we can give one another are not the wrapped presents under the tree, but the stories we share, the memories we create, and the traditions we preserve. They are the threads that weave together the tapestry of our family's history, connecting us to our roots while allowing us to grow and flourish in the present. So this Christmas, as you gather with your loved ones, I invite you to pause and reflect on your own family traditions. Ask yourself what they mean, why they matter, and how they connect you to something larger than yourself. Share the stories behind your customs, not just with your children, but with all who gather around your table. In doing so, you will be preserving not just traditions, but the very essence of who you are and where you come from. And perhaps, in the quiet moments of reflection that this season brings, you might discover your own hidden broom, those seemingly ordinary practices that carry extraordinary meaning, waiting to be acknowledged, honored, and passed forward to future generations. For in the end, it is through these traditions, these rituals, these seemingly small acts that we preserve the essence of who we are, where we've been, and who we hope to become. They are the invisible threads that connect us across time and space, binding us to those who came before us and those who will follow, creating a legacy that transcends individual lives and endures through generations. As snow continues to fall outside my window, I find myself filled with gratitude for the broom tradition, for my grandmother's courage in sharing her story, for the opportunity to preserve and adapt this meaningful practice for future generations, and for the reminder that in our most cherished traditions, we find not just continuity, but connection to our past, to each other, and to something larger than ourselves that gives our lives meaning and purpose. This Christmas, and always, may we honor the traditions that connect us, may we create new ones that reflect our values, and may we never forget the power of memory, story, and love to shape who we are and who we will become. For in these things, we find not just the meaning of Christmas, but the meaning of life itself.